Hey y'all. Okay, in this first assignment, you'll be focusing on pull toys and a pair of shoes or a pair of boots. We'll start out talking about the pull toys and other toys made out of a variety of material, but primarily clay. I'm going to talk about clay, but you can be influenced by just about anything relevant to a toy, or it doesn't have to be representational either. You could go abstract, you can go geometric with your forms. It just has to be a pull toy. Um, so here's some metal ones. Here's a bunch of clay ones from Rome, and you can see how there's these kind of spinny top things on strings. There's dolls. There's um, animals that you play with, and the kind of idea of the top. You can see that. Here's an old piece from the Mayan culture. Has a little interactive element. The helmet is removable. Here's a very old piece from a cave out of Germany, around 35 to 40,000 years old. And this one's made out of ivory. Here's a clay piece from Mexico. And you see how that tile is actually able to be placed back in the chest, and it's just like an interactive piece again. This is speculatively a turtle that would be pulled. You can see the holes. I'm not sure if it's really a pull toy, but as you get into it, here's the first pull toy that I could find, the oldest one from Museum of Fine Art in Boston, around 2500 BCE. Here's from Veracruz. The jaguar was one of those animals that was spiritual to people. So you see why they might make a toy. What would it be for? You know, kids would be playing with something that meant something sometimes. A horse from Rome. Nice one from Cyprus. Like little elements with little pots. I'm not sure if they come off, but it's, you know, again, like when you're playing with toys, things that come apart. Always good for kids. Here's some wooden ones from Rome. A couple more. Some of the old ones we find are pretty solid, but then some of them are hollow. I'm going to ask you to do this hollow technique. You're going to be using coil building, pinch pots, and slab techniques to work on these pieces, both with the shoes, boots, and the pull toys. There's a demonstration video, and also I'll be doing this in the classroom. So the idea of making these a certain thickness is really important to get them through the firing. We'll talk about that and the technical aspects. As far as the concept go, your pull toys are really open. You can go abstract, you can go architectonic, representational, anything you want with these pull toys. The scale will be a minimum of 12 inches and a maximum of 18 inches. So fairly large, but nothing really small. I want you to learn the techniques through these. All right, let's talk about shoes and boots. Obviously, we all have some on our feet right now. Generally, it's winter, spring, fall. You should always be wearing shoes in the studio here. The utility of the shoe, what the shoe is for, like maybe these are old school basketball and skateboard shoes, you know, but what it's for is something, what it means to you. There's a lot of ways to look at the shoe or the boot. So the pair of shoes or pair of boots should mean something to you. It could be one of your ancestor, your grandpa, your grandma, your dad, a friend of yours. It could be a pair of shoes that you don't own. You know, it could be just something that you really are inspired by aesthetically and conceptually. So let's talk about one of the first shoes that we found. And of course, a lot of shoes were, fibrous materials, and so they didn't really last. So imagine they might even be older than this one. This one's found in Armenia, and it was in a more of a hermetically sealed kind of environment. I mean, you find things in bogs where the oxygen hasn't deteriorated, or where animals haven't been able to eat that material. So there's an old moccasin, and the ones on the right, I believe, are from somewhere in Asia. So again, fiber materials, that's It's kind of the one that makes sense first. Of course, you've probably seen the wooden shoes, the Dutch clogs. So feasibly, you can make these actually fit, and we'll talk about that. If you want to wear these, they're not going to be comfortable, but we can talk about scale and the shrinkage of clay. So you're going to have to let me know if you're interested in that. Again, on the scale of these, they should be around 12 inches. If it's a boot, of course, it could be taller, around 18 inches, but if it's a shoe, around 12 to 18 inches. So you can make them more clown shoes, extra large, um, and so your scale shouldn't be smaller than 12 inches. So the history of shoes, moccasins and sandals, some of the first ones we find, and you can see in this little pictorial of history of shoes kind of, some of them are high, and high heels later on become like this more fashion thing, but the idea of having shoes like these from China in a flooded area, it makes sense. So you can be up out of the mud, out of the water. So there's actually utility to that. Also, probably quite skillful to walk in these. Like you have to like think about how hard it is to even walk in high heels. So these are very old ones from China. And as we get into Europe, you find court shoes, and like the utility is less about, uh, you know, the heels are men primarily. I think in the beginning, high heels were really men shoes, I guess, to create a stature, give you more height. Um, but these are more about fashion and nobility, maybe. But the utility of the shoe, like this old one from the 20s, here's a nice rubber swimming shoe. You think about what your shoes are for. Again, what they're for, what do they mean. It's the idea of where you go with it is pretty open. From the 50s, with H&M Rhymes in England, with really awesome Josiah Wedgwood's company, uh, and they worked together with these heels. They collaborated with Jasper Ware to make the heels on these high heel shoes here. So it's a soft paste porcelain on a colored clay for the heel. As we get to the contemporary side, Doc Martens and a lot of shoe designers will work with imagery. Like this one on the left is from Hokusai's Big Wave painting, and it's a collaboration with the Metropolitan Museum. You can see the other ones on the right are riffing off of or being influenced by Chinese porcelains. And the artist who is the designer for Doc Martens originally was one of my favorite shoe designers. His name is John Fluvog. And Fluvog shoes are, if you want to go to their website, it's a pretty good source for some pretty interesting shoe design right now. And some of the shoes, like here's one riffing off an old clog. So this is a Fluvog shoe with wood and leather. I wish they make these kid shoes in my size, but like these are some kid shoes. So a lot of shoe designers, they're looking at like influence outside of, you know, just just the utility. They're working with aesthetics all the time. This particular designer is working off of Persian rugs. There's some shoes that kind of play with that line of the bow and just like this movement. The ones on the right are just playing with this movement of form around the foot, as are these. So a lot of times when you're looking at utilitarian objects such as shoes, cups, teapots, whatever, you might sacrifice some of that utility object. Some of these shoes don't look very comfortable, but you suffer for your fashion. That's what they say sometimes. So these shoes are like emulating that ballerina on your toe kind of thing. These shoes are very abstract in nature, as are these, sort of, one riffing off of more of a milk drop or water drop. Here's some that play with kind of a punk rock, um, gothy kind of thing. These are just funny and weird. They're just weird shoes. You find a lot of weird shoes, and you find a lot of humor in shoes. So you can play with that humor to the best of however you want to go. You know. These with the tongue, obviously, when they're off the feet, they have a little more sense of humor. One with the gum as a heel. These are just kind of creepy, that sense of humor. Well, these are just kind of dumb. That CD shoe there. It's got to skip, right? But anyway, how you take it, how you use the shoe as a canvas, sort of something that you can play with. I was getting a shoe as art. I don't know. This may be a 3D design student who did this cardboard shoe on the right, but there's this artist, Cecilia Levy, that I like that does a lot of paper art, paper shoes. Those are pretty nice. And how art then also crosses over into the shoe. If you look at this old ceramic piece and how the imagery on it is then taken for the design of the shoe. Well, we get into the history of using clay to talk about shoes and feet in general, but you find a lot of objects across almost all the cultures that have worked with clay talking about the shoe. A lot of times you drink out of them. There's rhytons, Greek and Roman, and all the cultures that have done it. They seem to like direct it towards drinking out of these things. If you think about the big clay boot out of Germany that you would drink a bunch of beer out of, similar idea. Here's another one from Mexico. There's a slightly newer one from Mexico. Those first ones are much older. Here's Neolithic China pieces. You see a lot of similarities in how the clay is dealt with. Some from the Mississippian culture here in this continent. Costa Rica. Some Peru. Some from Colima. So again, you find them everywhere. Everywhere where people worked with clay, which is virtually all around the world. There's some from a museum in Athens, Attica, where 1300 BCE. Weird one from Rome. I don't know if this is an oil lamp or what this was, but so as get into contemporary. Shu Shu Tong is very famous. I'm not sure if he's still with us. He was an artist I got to meet. He's one of the most famous ceramic artists in China. And Shu Shu Tong was really noted for his sculpture and his teapots and utilitarian stuff, especially. But when I got to visit his compound, it was pretty fascinating to see some of the shoes and other kind of foulier kind of stuff that he did. So trompe l'oeil, that French word to fool the eye, is really a lot older than that, coining it as a French term. And in the Yixing area, Dingsang, Dingsu, in China, you'll find a lot of things that are super realistic. As you go through that trompe l'oeil video that I've set up with Marilyn Levine and Sylvia Hyman and Paul Dresang and Richard Shaw and all these amazing people who are trompe l'oeil artists in clay, I feel like Marilyn Levine is one to really look at, especially when we're talking about boots and shoes. She made hundreds of shoe cups also. And so you start looking at that utility of it other than wearing it, like drinking from it. Again, back to those older pieces. purely as a sculpture object, these kind of shoes here with Sergei Yusupov's piece are interesting to look at. I'm not sure who made these. Like student work, a lot of people like Nike shoes, and maybe the basketball player and you might see that, or um, you again choosing the shoe. So how we make it, again, we'll talk about the slabs and coil building techniques along with pinch forms and additive and subtractive techniques. Um, Here's some demonstration pieces that I did, and you can see how I was trying to teach somebody playing with that leather like Marilyn Levine would do. Sylvia Hyman did a lot of surface details that I learned from her a little bit. One of my students worked for her back when I taught in Nashville, and so I have, whatever you need to do for it. If you want to think about how texture is going to inform these pieces, both the pull toys and the shoes or boots, there's different ways to emboss it and play with that surface of your piece. So we'll talk about that further. I hope you enjoy this assignment. It should be pretty fun. You have uh, plenty of time to do this, and want to make sure that you have enough time to really put the detail in. So it's really important for you to look at details on these pieces. So we'll talk further. Don't be intimidated to ask me questions as the quarter goes along. Let me know if you need anything as you're struggling. Sometimes I don't see it, so make sure you're not intimidated to ask me to go over something with you if you need any help. All right? So get a hold of me, and I will see you in class.